You can't live here. Her voice still echoes in my head. I had just bought my dream home when a stranger stormed my driveway, screaming that my house belonged to her HOA, one that doesn't even exist. But when she revealed details about my life no stranger could possibly know, I realized this wasn't just harassment. It was the beginning of a nightmare that would expose a massive criminal network hiding in plain sight. Hey everyone, if you love real-life stories where ordinary homeowners fight back against impossible odds, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon, because stories like this one prove that courage can turn victims into heroes. The day Ethan Miller moved into his dream home should have been the happiest day of his life. For 8 years, he and his wife Lena had saved every extra dollar, skipped vacations, and lived on takeout dinners to buy a house they could finally call their own. That morning, the air felt clean and light, sunlight spilling through the branches of a massive oak tree that crowned their new front yard. The house stood proud and symmetrical, a colonial-style beauty with white shutters and a red brick path that curved gently to the porch. It was the kind of house that made you feel like you'd finally done something right in life. The moving truck rumbled off, leaving behind the smell of cardboard, new paint, and possibility. Ethan's chest swelled with satisfaction as he carried the last box from his old Honda and placed it beside the entryway. The sound of Lena's laughter echoed faintly from inside, where she was arranging furniture and humming off-key. For the first time in years, he felt like everything was falling into place. But in the calm of that suburban morning, something shifted, a quiet disturbance in the rhythm of peace. It began with the faint crunch of gravel under sharp shoes. When Ethan turned toward the driveway, he saw her, a woman in her 50s with hair so precisely cut it looked measured by ruler, the kind of blonde that glared under sunlight. Her white polo shirt and khaki pants made her look like she was on her way to inspect a golf course. She walked with authority, chin high, eyes locked straight on him, like a general marching toward a target. There was nothing friendly in her presence. No wave. No smile. Just a storm brewing behind those practiced, judgmental eyes. Ethan's pulse picked up. He'd seen people like her before, the self-appointed neighborhood enforcer who thought every patch of grass was her jurisdiction. But there was something colder here, something more deliberate. The woman stopped 3 feet away, her shadow crossing his sneakers, and the silence between them felt like a held breath. In that moment, the cheerful sounds of birds and distant lawnmowers seemed to fade away. Ethan had the odd feeling he was being measured, dissected, filed into some mental report. From that second forward, the day stopped being about new beginnings. It became the start of something much darker. She didn't introduce herself, didn't offer congratulations or a welcome basket. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the house behind him, his house, with a look that mixed ownership and disdain. The air around her seemed to thicken, heavy with entitlement. Ethan felt his skin prickle, that instinctive warning that something was wrong. Later, he would remember this moment with chilling clarity, how ordinary it looked, how deceptively calm it felt before everything unraveled. He went inside, trying to shake off the unease, but the feeling clung to him like static. By afternoon, Lena had gone to her night shift at the hospital, and the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the whisper of boxes being unpacked. Yet every few minutes, Ethan found himself glancing out the window toward the street. And each time, he swore he saw movement, a flicker of white fabric between hedges, the shape of a person standing too long at the curb. That night, while placing the trash bins by the road, he noticed something strange. A car idled a few houses down with its headlights off, engine low and steady. When he turned his flashlight toward it, the vehicle pulled away, its tires whispering against the asphalt. Ethan told himself it was coincidence, probably just a lost driver. But as he walked back up the driveway, a rustle behind the oak tree made him stop cold. He stared into the shadows, his breath visible in the cool night air. Nothing. Just the creak of branches and the faint hum of cicadas. Inside, the silence pressed close. The house felt less like a dream now and more like a stage, each window an open eye. Sleep came late and restless. Morning brought no relief. When Ethan stepped outside to get the mail, the woman was standing at the property line, perfectly still, like she'd been waiting for him. Her posture was stiff, her lips pressed thin. He felt an immediate, irrational sense of intrusion, as if she'd somehow crossed into his private world without taking a step. Her gaze swept the yard, the porch, the car, as though evaluating every inch of it against a set of invisible rules. Something in that look made him feel smaller, like a trespasser on his own property. Throughout the day, she seemed to appear everywhere, walking the sidewalk, pausing at the corner, chatting with neighbors while glancing repeatedly toward his house. Her presence became impossible to ignore, like a dark cloud refusing to move away. That evening, while unpacking in the living room, Ethan noticed a flicker of light on the wall, a tiny red glow reflected in the glass of a picture frame. He frowned, tracing the source to the window. And there, barely visible against the bark of the oak tree, was the lens of a small black camera pointing directly at his driveway. For several long seconds, he couldn't breathe. His mind raced backward through the past week, every moment outside, every conversation near that tree. The unsettling feeling of being watched wasn't paranoia after all. Someone had been monitoring him, cataloging his life like data. He stepped outside, heart pounding, and approached the oak tree. The camera was mounted neatly on a branch, its cable snaking downward into the soil. Not a leaf disturbed, not a footprint in the dirt. It was installed by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When he pulled out his phone to record it, the realization hit him like a slap. The woman, whoever she was, hadn't just been observing him. She had been preparing for this. Preparing for him. That night, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table long after midnight, replaying every detail of their move, every visit during the purchase process, every time they'd toured the property before closing. Could she have seen them then? Followed them? Memorized their schedule? The thought made his stomach twist. Outside, a motion sensor light blinked on, flooding the yard in pale yellow. For a moment, the familiar outline of the oak tree looked monstrous, its thick branches curling like arms over the house. The camera gleamed faintly in the glow before disappearing again into darkness. Sleep never came. The hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud, the creak of wood too sudden. When Lena came home at dawn, she found Ethan sitting at the window, staring at that same spot in the yard. The dream house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a trap. As the sun rose, he saw the woman again, walking briskly down the sidewalk with a clipboard under her arm, phone pressed to her ear. Her expression was calm, almost satisfied. She didn't glance his way, but she didn't need to. The damage was already done. Ethan didn't know her name yet, but soon he would. By the end of that week, the name Valerie Shaw would become the sound of fear itself, whispered by neighbors, reported to police, and eventually printed in courtroom transcripts. And the quiet street that once smelled of fresh grass and safety would become a battleground between a homeowner who just wanted peace and a woman who believed every inch of the neighborhood belonged to her. 3 days. That's all it took for peace to vanish completely. Ethan had spent those days trying to convince himself that the camera in the oak tree didn't mean what it looked like. Maybe it belonged to the previous owners. Maybe it was for wildlife. Maybe the neighbor was just eccentric, not malicious. But each rationalization crumbled under the weight of unease that wouldn't leave his chest. He had called the previous homeowners that morning to ask about the camera. They were shocked, confused, and certain it hadn't been there during their time. That confirmed his fear. Someone installed it after the sale, and only one person in the neighborhood seemed obsessed enough to do it. By the third morning, Ethan was running on caffeine and nerve. He drove to the hardware store, picked up a ladder and wire cutters, and told himself he'd take the camera down before work. But when he returned home, his street didn't look right. From the distance, something blocked the sunlight that usually spilled across his driveway. As he got closer, he froze. A large moving truck, the kind used for cross-state relocations, sat squarely in front of his garage, engine running, hazard lights blinking. Men in uniforms carried furniture toward his house, grunting under the weight of a floral-patterned couch. For a few seconds, Ethan thought there had to be a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong address. But then he saw her. Valerie. She stood confidently at the base of his porch steps, clipboard in hand, giving orders like a foreman. Her blonde bob didn't move in the wind. She was wearing the same white polo, same khaki pants, but now she had a lanyard around her neck, as if she were performing some official duty. Her posture said authority. Her eyes said war. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears as he pulled his car to the curb, jumped out, and stared in disbelief. The movers hesitated, sensing tension, but Valerie didn't even look at him at first. She was too busy inspecting the furniture as it entered his doorway. The sheer audacity stunned him. His heart pounded with confusion and anger. This wasn't just a neighbor overstepping boundaries. This was a full-blown invasion. In a daze, Ethan watched the scene unfold, boxes labeled dining room, master bedroom, Ruth's estate. One mover carried a framed photo of an elderly woman in black and white. Another followed with lamps wrapped in bubble plastic. They moved with the weary obedience of men paid to follow orders, not question reality. Valerie turned finally, her expression perfectly calm, almost smug. The early sunlight glinted off her wedding ring as she gestured toward the driveway, talking loudly enough for the neighbors who had begun to peek from their curtains. Within minutes, whispers spread down the street like wind through dry grass. People emerged from porches and driveways, phones in hand, drawn by the escalating chaos. Even the mailman slowed his truck to watch. Ethan felt the collective gaze of the entire block weighing down on him. And then, without warning, Valerie raised a folder high above her head like a flag. Inside it were neatly clipped papers, printed deeds, letters, stamps. Official-looking documents that, to an untrained eye, might appear legitimate. She began speaking to the growing audience, her voice carrying a tone of moral righteousness that didn't belong to truth, but to performance. She announced that this property belonged to her late mother-in-law's estate, that the sale was fraudulent, that she and her husband were reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Every word was calculated to sound believable, every phrase dripping with manufactured grief and authority. And people believed her, or at least, they weren't sure who to believe. Ethan could feel his throat tighten. This wasn't confusion anymore. This was strategy. She was weaponizing public perception, turning the quiet street into a courtroom of whispers before the law could even intervene. The movers, unsure who the real homeowner was, began to hesitate. One of them, a large man with kind eyes, looked at Ethan, then at Valerie, and slowly set down the couch mid-lawn. The moment felt suspended in air, a collective question hanging silently between them all. Who really owns this house? Inside, Ethan's thoughts spun like static. He replayed every paper he'd signed, every title, every signature verified by the notary. Everything had been in order. Yet here she was, a stranger, trying to overwrite reality with audacity. And she was doing it well. Then came the sound of sirens. 2 police cruisers rolled down Maple Street, lights flashing. Neighbors scattered slightly, though their eyes stayed fixed on the scene. The officers stepped out with the calm weariness of men who'd seen too many domestic disputes and not enough sense. As they approached, Valerie straightened her shoulders, switching instantly into a cooperative, falsely sweet demeanor. Her performance was perfect, just distressed enough to seem wronged, just calm enough to look credible. She handed over her folder with trembling hands and rehearsed sympathy. Ethan watched helplessly as one officer flipped through the pages. The documents were impressive: seals, stamps, notarized signatures. For a moment, even the officer's expression faltered, unsure what to believe. Ethan handed over his own deed, shaking from adrenaline. Both sets of papers were studied under the harsh sunlight while the crowd held its collective breath. Finally, the senior officer stepped forward. His tone was diplomatic, neutral. The matter was a civil dispute, he said. Ownership could only be resolved through the courts. No one could move furniture into the home until documentation was verified. Valerie's mask cracked for the first time. The faintest flash of fury lit her eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. Her jaw tightened, but she smiled again, speaking softly to the officers in words Ethan couldn't hear. Then, without another glance at him, she turned toward the movers, signaling them to stop for now. The officers told both parties to refrain from further action until legal verification was complete. To Ethan, it sounded like victory. But Valerie's subtle smirk said otherwise. She hadn't lost, she was just regrouping. As the truck pulled away, the crowd slowly dispersed. The mailman resumed his route. Life resumed its ordinary rhythm. But the sense of normalcy was shattered. Every glance from a neighbor carried a trace of suspicion, an unspoken question: what if she's right? Ethan stood motionless on his porch as silence reclaimed the street. The air felt heavier, like the calm after a hurricane. He turned slowly toward the mailbox to retrieve the morning's letters, and that's when he saw it. A small, silver key lay tucked deep inside the back slot, hidden behind a pile of envelopes. A spare key. One that didn't belong to him. His heart froze. He'd changed the locks after moving in. This wasn't a forgotten spare. This was planted. Someone had placed it there, and it fit his house. He turned it in his palm, light catching its grooves. The realization hit like ice through his veins. She'd been inside. Not recently, earlier. Before he bought the house. Before he even knew her name. Maybe while the previous owners were still packing, maybe while realtors were showing the property. She had copied the key long before the sale. She'd been planning this. That night, Ethan sat in the dark living room, the key resting on the coffee table under the dim light of a single lamp. Outside, the street was quiet again, but peace felt impossible. Every sound made him flinch: the hum of air conditioning, the tick of the clock, the whisper of wind against the window. He kept seeing the truck, the fake documents, her confident smirk. How do you fight someone who believes lies so completely that they become truth to her? He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. What happened next would transform Maple Street into a battleground of deceit and fear, and reveal a conspiracy that reached far beyond his neighborhood. For now, the night ended in silence. But somewhere out there, Valerie Shaw was awake, planning her next move. And Ethan Miller had just realized he was living next door to a predator who thought she owned him, body, home, and soul. The morning after the moving truck invasion, Maple Street looked deceptively peaceful. The same trimmed lawns. The same kids waiting for the school bus. The same sunlight glinting off mailboxes that had become silent witnesses to madness. Yet, beneath that calm suburban surface, Ethan could feel something had shifted, as if the whole neighborhood was quietly holding its breath, waiting for the next act of the unfolding drama. Inside his house, the air smelled like cardboard and anxiety. The boxes that had once symbolized new beginnings now felt like barricade. Lena had left for her night shift hours ago, but before leaving she had begged Ethan not to confront Valerie again. Let the lawyer handle it, she'd said. But deep down, Ethan knew there was no peace until he understood why this woman was targeting them so deliberately. The key he'd found the previous night sat on the kitchen counter, glinting under the morning light, silent, damning proof that his enemy had once walked freely inside his home. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined Valerie standing in his hallway, her polished shoes tapping against his hardwood floor, her eyes sweeping the room like a predator mapping territory. By 9 a.m., he'd made 3 cups of coffee and finished none. The doorbell rang. The sharp chime cut through the silence, making him flinch. Through the peephole, he saw an older man, short gray hair, plaid shirt, and a calm but serious expression. Robert Miller. He lived 3 houses down. Ethan knew him only in passing, the quiet retiree who kept his lawn perfect and always waved but rarely spoke. Ethan opened the door, expecting small talk or perhaps a polite warning about neighborhood gossip. Instead, Robert held up a manila envelope thick with papers and photograph. His voice was steady but grave. "I think you need to see this," he said. No small talk. No preamble. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Ethan and Lena had dreamed of family breakfast. Robert placed the envelope between them and exhaled slowly, like a man about to reveal something heavy. "I've been keeping records of that woman for months," he said. "You're not the first person she's done this to." Ethan's pulse quickened as Robert opened the envelope and began to slide out the content. The first photo showed Valerie's husband, Greg, the nervous-looking man who always stood behind her during confrontations, like a shadow afraid of its own shape. He was sitting at a coffee shop downtown, surrounded by papers spread across a table. The next image zoomed in, Greg copying signatures, practicing loops and flourishes over and over. Below that, screenshots of bank statements, 3 payments to a company called Document Preparation Services. Each payment exactly $250. The pattern was unmistakable. Robert explained in a low, measured tone that he had noticed Valerie's strange behavior months ago, endless inspections, late-night meetings, boxes of documents being carried between her car and her home. At first, he thought she was part of a genuine HOA committee. But when she began targeting families who were moving into the neighborhood, accusing them of buying illegitimate properties, Robert's accounting instincts kicked in. He started watching and documenting. As Ethan listened, a cold realization crept over him. Valerie and Greg weren't just deranged neighbors. They were criminals. Robert produced printed text messages he'd intercepted, blurry photos of exchanges between Valerie and Greg that looked like planning notes for a business operation. They referred to their scheme as the Inheritance Recovery Project. Each message read like a blueprint for fraud. Next target pending closing date confirmation. Draft new deed under Ruth's name. Need to practice notary seal match by Thursday. It was a professional con, methodical, rehearsed, and heartless. Ethan felt his stomach twist. He'd moved into a neighborhood that wasn't just under watch. It was under siege. Robert continued, explaining how Greg was the forger and Valerie the face of the operation. Together, they created fake property documents, filed bogus claims, and harassed legitimate homeowners until some gave up and moved away. When those families left, Valerie's so-called investment company would swoop in with low offers and buy the homes legally, laundering the stolen property through paperwork so clean it fooled most county offices. The horror wasn't in the complexity, it was in the simplicity. They'd weaponized bureaucracy. And now they were trying to do it to Ethan. Robert leaned forward, voice lowering. "I think she copied your house key during one of the showings. She used to be friends with the previous owners. Helped them stage the place for open houses. That's how she got access." The room tilted slightly. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. Every memory of touring the house replayed, the faint feeling of being watched, the way curtains had always been slightly parted, the missing welcome mat he'd noticed after signing the closing documents. Tiny clues that had meant nothing then but now screamed danger. Robert went on, describing how Greg's gambling debts had fueled their desperation. Valerie's obsession with control made her the perfect manipulator, and Greg's financial ruin made him the perfect accomplice. Together, they'd convinced themselves they were reclaiming stolen family property when, in truth, they were orchestrating one of the most elaborate neighborhood fraud schemes imaginable. But Robert hadn't come just to warn Ethan. He came to help. He slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything I've found is on here: photos, bank records, transaction receipts, voice notes from neighborhood meetings. You'll need this when you go to your lawyer." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. He just stared at the small, unassuming piece of plastic on the table, evidence that could destroy the people who'd turned his dream home into a nightmare. It felt heavy, almost sacred. Robert's gaze softened. "I've lived here 30 years. People like her, They thrive because no one fights back. You look like someone who will. When Robert left, the silence felt different, less empty, more loaded. The morning sun poured through the blinds, cutting the room into sharp lines of light and shadow. The flash drive caught the light like a shard of glass. That afternoon, Ethan sat at his computer, opening the files. The deeper he went, the more monstrous the picture became. Photos of fake deeds, signatures forged with practiced precision. Voice recordings of Valerie instructing Greg to handle paperwork before homeowners realized the discrepancy. Even a draft spreadsheet labeled Target Properties, Summer Rotation. His address was third on the list. It was all there, proof of systematic theft hiding behind the smile of a suburban neighbor. Anger rose inside him, pure and electric. For the first time since moving in, fear turned into resolve. He wasn't going to be her next victim. He printed copies of the files, organized them in a binder, and called his lawyer. Aaron Walsh, a level-headed man who'd handled property cases for years, promised to review everything immediately. When Ethan mentioned Robert's evidence, Aaron's voice sharpened. "Keep those files safe," he said. "If this is as real as it sounds, we're dealing with criminal fraud, not just a property dispute." By evening, exhaustion set in. But before heading to bed, Ethan walked to the front window, looking out toward Valerie's house. The blinds were open. Through the glass, he saw her silhouette, pacing, talking on the phone, gesturing angrily. The sight chilled him. Her confidence hadn't cracked. It was growing. Like she knew he was watching and didn't care. That night, he dreamed of papers falling from the sky, deeds, wills, signatures raining down like confetti while Valerie stood laughing beneath them, holding his house key between her fingers. When he woke, the dream lingered like smoke. At dawn, his phone buzzed with a new message, from an unknown number. A photo of his house, taken from the street. Below it, a single sentence. "You shouldn't have involved Robert." Ethan's blood ran cold. Valerie knew. She was watching again. What he didn't know yet, what no one on Maple Street could have imagined, was that Robert's evidence had already set off a chain reaction that would tear their quiet neighborhood apart, piece by piece, until the entire web of corruption beneath it was exposed. The war for Maple Street was no longer just personal. It was about to become criminal. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself anticipated conflict. A light drizzle slicked the streets of Maple County, turning the courthouse steps into mirrors of concrete and rain. Ethan stood there beneath an umbrella, binder clutched to his chest. Inside it, every piece of evidence Robert had given him. Proof of forgery. Proof of fraud. Proof of obsession. He hadn't slept again. Valerie's anonymous text still echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't have involved Robert." She knew about the evidence. She knew he was fighting back. Which meant she was going to escalate. Inside the courthouse, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the waiting area. The hallway smelled of old paper and damp coats. Ethan sat beside his attorney, Aaron Walsh, who flipped calmly through the binder as if this were just another case. But Ethan knew, nothing about this was ordinary. This wasn't a legal dispute anymore. It was psychological warfare disguised in paperwork. Across the room sat Valerie and her husband, Greg. She wore a cream-colored blazer and pearls, like she was attending a charity luncheon rather than defending a criminal scheme. Greg sat beside her, eyes hollow, hands trembling slightly as he fidgeted with a folded napkin. Valerie's expression, however, was serene, almost radiant. She was confident, rehearsed, and terrifyingly composed. The queen of her own delusion. When the bailiff called their case, the sound echoed through the room like the beginning of a performance. The courtroom filled quickly. Neighbors, reporters, even curious county employees who had heard rumors about the HOA woman trying to seize someone's house. The judge, an older man with silver hair and sharp eyes, glanced between the parties with the patience of someone who'd seen every kind of human absurdity. But even he seemed uncertain of what he was about to witness. Valerie went first. She rose with theatrical grace, walking to the front as if she owned the courtroom itself. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and practiced, the kind that could easily charm those unfamiliar with manipulation. She presented herself as a grieving daughter-in-law trying to reclaim her late mother's estate, a victim of fraudulent paperwork that had stolen her family's legacy. She produced documents, the same forgeries Ethan had already seen, with notarized stamps, signatures, and letterheads that gleamed with false legitimacy. The performance was mesmerizing. For anyone without context, she looked heartbreakingly sincere. Her tone wavered in just the right places, her hands trembled when describing her supposed loss, and when she glanced at Greg, tears shimmered in her eyes. It was an Oscar-worthy act. Ethan sat motionless, jaw tight, as she spun her web of lies. He could feel the audience's emotions shifting, some sympathetic, others skeptical. Even the judge seemed momentarily moved. But then came Aaron's turn. He stood slowly, his calm demeanor contrasting Valerie's emotional theatrics. His voice was steady, professional, unflinching. Without raising it once, he began to dismantle her story piece by piece. He pointed out inconsistencies in the dates, discrepancies in signatures, and anomalies in document formatting. Then he projected the evidence onto the courtroom monitor. Side-by-side comparisons of Valerie's official deed and the real one from the county office. Forgery marks visible under magnification. Greg's financial records showing payments to document preparation services. Screenshots of Valerie's text messages coordinating the scheme. The shift in the room was immediate. Gasp. Murmurs. The judge's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. Aaron continued, explaining how the same fraudulent pattern appeared in multiple neighborhoods, all involving Valerie's name in some capacity. He referenced Robert's documentation and the witness statements from previous homeowners who had been harassed or threatened into moving. Each revelation hit like a hammer, chipping away at Valerie's carefully constructed facade. Valerie's mask began to crack. The serene smile faded. Her fingers clenched the edge of her chair. When Aaron displayed a photograph of Greg forging signatures in a coffee shop, her head snapped toward her husband. Greg avoided her gaze, guilt written across every line of his face. She whispered something under her breath, sharp, venomous, before turning back toward the judge with forced composure. The judge's tone hardened. He asked Valerie to explain the inconsistencies. She tried, desperately, erratically, but her once smooth narrative now faltered. Her voice rose, her gestures became frantic, her story tangled in contradictions. Within minutes, the poised homeowner had transformed into a cornered liar. And then it happened, the moment that would make Valerie Shaw infamous. As Aaron presented one final piece of evidence, a video clip showing her instructing Greg to get the papers ready before the new buyer signs, Valerie exploded. She stood abruptly, pointing at the screen, her face flushed red with fury. Her voice, once melodic, turned shrill and piercing. She accused the judge of corruption, the county of conspiracy, the lawyer of falsifying evidence. Every sentence grew louder, wilder, more incoherent. Security guards inched closer, anticipating a scene. The courtroom descended into stunned silence as Valerie ranted about deep state property theft rings and underground land seizures. Her words tumbled over each other in manic waves. Her eyes darted across the audience, searching for allies who weren't there. Her reality had fractured completely, live, in front of everyone. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. In less than 5 minutes, Valerie's downfall became viral history in the making. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, but Valerie's voice drowned out the sound. "This neighborhood belongs to me," she screamed. "These people are invaders. This is my family's land." 2 deputies stepped forward, gently but firmly guiding her toward the exit as she kicked and cursed. Greg followed, head bowed, his silence saying more than any confession could. The hearing concluded swiftly after that. The judge dismissed Valerie's claims entirely and issued a restraining order preventing her from contacting Ethan, Lena, or Robert. He also referred the matter to county investigators, noting potential charges of fraud and harassment. When it was over, Ethan stood outside the courthouse in the cold drizzle, the sound of rain blending with the faint chatter of reporters behind him. Relief washed over him, but it wasn't peace. Not yet. Valerie might have lost the battle, but she had the unshakable madness of someone who believed the world owed her everything. People like that didn't surrender. They regrouped. That evening, social media exploded. The video of Valerie's courtroom meltdown spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "HOA woman claims she owns neighbor's home, loses it in court." Clips flooded TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. The hashtag HOA Karen trended for 2 straight days. Ethan's inbox overflowed with interview requests and sympathy messages from strangers who'd seen the viral footage. Yet, as vindicating as it felt, the fame carried unease. Valerie was humiliated, cornered. And cornered people were dangerous. A week later, Ethan received a small package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single, framed photo, a screenshot from his security camera feed. He hadn't shared that footage with anyone. The image showed him and Lena standing on their porch, smiling on moving day. Scrawled across the glass in red marker were the words, "Still watching." Ethan froze, staring at it, pulse hammering in his ears. It was her handwriting. She was still out there. He turned slowly toward the window. Outside, Maple Street looked normal again. Mail trucks passing, children on bikes, neighbors watering lawns. But somewhere within that calm facade lurked the reminder that Valerie Shaw wasn't finished. Not yet. Her story was about to take a darker turn, one that reached far beyond neighborhood disputes and forged deeds. Because as county investigators would soon discover, Valerie's obsession with property ownership was just one branch of something much bigger and far more dangerous. The video of Valerie's courtroom meltdown had become a digital wildfire, spreading faster than gossip, louder than truth, unstoppable. Within 48 hours, it had racked up millions of views. Every frame, from her trembling hands to her final, furious scream, played on loop across social media feeds. The world now knew her as HOA Karen. For a brief moment, Ethan thought it was over. The restraining order, the humiliation, the laughter online, surely that was enough to make her disappear. But monsters rarely vanish when cornered. They evolve. In the days following the court hearing, silence fell over Maple Street like an uneasy fog. Valerie's house sat dark, curtains drawn, blinds closed tight. Greg's car hadn't moved from the driveway. Some neighbors said they'd seen police cars parked outside at night. Others claimed to hear shouting inside her home. No one dared to knock. Ethan spent those days rebuilding a fragile sense of normalcy. He changed locks again, installed motion lights, even replaced the mailbox. He and Lena tried to laugh about it, tried to live again. But under every small joy, every dinner, every morning coffee, lay the dull hum of dread. He knew it wasn't over. He could feel it. Then came the call from his attorney, Aaron Walsh. It was a gray Thursday morning when Ethan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Aaron's tone was urgent. County investigators had uncovered something massive, something that made Valerie's harassment look like a symptom of a much larger disease. At first, Ethan didn't understand. But as Aaron explained, the pieces began to click into place. Valerie hadn't just targeted him. She'd been operating across multiple counties under the guise of HOA management, property consulting, and estate reclamation. Her network, a web of falsified deeds, shell companies, and fraudulent tax appeals, had siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from legitimate homeowners and county tax funds. It wasn't just harassment. It was organized crime. Investigators found that Valerie had filed dozens of inheritance-based property tax appeals using the names of deceased residents. Each time a homeowner passed away, Valerie's document preparation services filed a fake claim stating that she or one of her shell companies was the rightful inheritor. Then, using manipulated tax records and fake inspections, she petitioned for refunds of overpaid property taxes. The county, swamped with paperwork and budget cuts, processed them without question. She was stealing from the dead and the living. Greg, meanwhile, had been gambling away the proceeds at local casinos, hiding the trail through cryptocurrency transfers. Investigators traced more than 25 fraudulent tax filings linked to his account. The total loss, $680,000. But the fraud didn't end with money. Valerie had used her HOA authority to issue bogus violation fines to targeted neighbors, often new homeowners who didn't yet understand local laws. Letters on fake letterheads demanded immediate payment or legal escalation. Some victims paid. Others moved away out of fear. Every detail screamed control. Valerie hadn't wanted wealth alone, she wanted dominion. Ethan sat frozen as Aaron explained the scope of it. Valerie wasn't just one disturbed woman with entitlement issues, she was the face of a hidden empire that thrived on intimidation and bureaucracy. Her mind had fused greed and obsession into a system that weaponized fear. That evening, Ethan opened the door to find Robert on his porch again. The older man looked pale, exhausted, but determined. In his hands was a thin folder, one more piece of the puzzle. Inside were photos of contractors' trucks, all bearing the same business name, Clearline Inspection and Property Services. It looked legitimate, but investigators had discovered that Clearline was one of Valerie's fake fronts. She used it to create false repair reports for homes she targeted, reports that declared properties unsafe or non-compliant, pressuring owners to sell cheap. Then, through intermediaries, she'd buy them under different LLC names and resell at market value. She was flipping fear into profit. Ethan felt sick. Every forged deed, every harassing letter, every camera hidden in a tree, it was all part of one seamless plan. And he had stumbled into it because his house, his ordinary suburban dream, sat on a spreadsheet labeled pending claim. Robert placed a trembling hand on the folder. "They're building a case now," he said quietly. "State-level investigators. She's under surveillance." But then he added something that made Ethan's stomach drop. "They think she has help inside the county office, someone approving the fake filings." That revelation changed everything. Valerie wasn't just bold, she was protected. Days later, the news broke publicly. A local journalist published an exposé titled, "The HOA Queen, Inside the Fraud Ring That Stole the Suburbs." It featured photos, leaked documents, and excerpts from court records. Valerie's smiling face stared from every headline, the once pristine homemaker now painted as the mastermind of a multi-county scam. The neighborhood became a media circus. Reporters parked vans along the street. Drones hovered above rooftops. Valerie's property looked like a crime scene. Police tape stretched across the gate, news anchors standing on the sidewalk rehearsing lines. For the first time, Ethan felt the balance of fear shift. The predator was finally being hunted. But victory came at a cost. The stress took its toll on Lena. The constant attention, the endless interviews, the fear of retaliation, it wore her down. One evening, while leaving work, she fainted from exhaustion and anxiety. At the hospital, Ethan sat beside her bed, her hand pale and cold in his. He blamed himself, even though he knew Valerie's madness was the true cause. But guilt doesn't care about logic. It digs into the softest parts of your heart. Outside, Maple Street glowed under police lights and camera flashes. Reporters spoke in hushed excitement while detectives moved in and out of Valerie's house carrying boxes labeled evidence. One by one, the lies were unpacked, documented, exposed. Inside those boxes were financial ledgers, fake inspection notices, even counterfeit notary stamps, dozens of them. Each stamp represented a stolen signature. Each file a stolen peace of mind. And yet, despite the mountain of proof, Valerie refused to confess. When confronted, she claimed she was protecting homeowners from corrupt county assessors. Her delusion was so deep that she saw herself as the hero of her own fraud. Investigators uncovered emails showing her correspondence with county tax officers, casual, even friendly. She had allies, people who'd approved her fake filings for years. In exchange, she promised them a cut of the refunds. It was a network, a silent agreement between greed and power. By the time the scope of the fraud was revealed, the total damage exceeded $2.3 million across 3 counties. Ethan watched it all unfold from his living room window, police lights flickering across his lawn like a surreal light show. He should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. But all he felt was hollow. Because somewhere beneath that chaos, beneath the flashing lights and camera crews, lived a woman who had once stood in his driveway and claimed his home. And part of him knew, she still believed it was hers. In her mind, the investigation wasn't the end. It was betrayal. That night, when the last patrol car left, Ethan stepped outside into the cool air. The street was eerily quiet again. Valerie's house was dark, windows sealed shut like a mausoleum. He stared at it for a long time, wondering what kind of mind could build such a machine of deceit and still sleep at night. The oak tree rustled softly beside him, the one that once hid her secret camera. He thought of how it all began, a smileless stranger, a false claim, a copied key. The peace that Maple Street once had was gone forever. But beneath the fear, something else had taken root, resolve. Because now Ethan understood what he was truly fighting against. Not a neighbor. Not even a criminal. He was fighting a system that had learned to wear a friendly face. And for the first time since moving in, he realized something vital. This story wasn't just about saving his home. It was about saving the truth. The night the police carried away Valerie's files, Maple Street exhaled for the first time in months. The silence afterward was almost sacred. The hum of the air felt cleaner, the wind softer, as if the neighborhood itself had been holding its breath through every act of madness. But silence can be deceptive. Beneath the calm, tension still rippled, quiet, dangerous, unfinished. Ethan stood by the window, watching the last patrol car disappear down the hill. The blue and red lights faded into the distance, leaving only the steady glow of street lamps. For the first time in a long while, his reflection in the glass didn't look terrified, just tired, determined, and ready. Something inside him had shifted. Fear had been burned out of him, replaced by a colder, clearer resolve. He had survived her lies. Now he wanted to destroy the web that had made her powerful. Over the following days, Ethan turned his home into a war room. The dining table became a battlefield of evidence. Printed emails, bank statements, fraudulent deeds, lists of victims. The flash drive Robert had given him now sat in the center like a trophy of truth. He spent every evening cross-referencing names, matching dates, tracing connections between Valerie's shell companies and county officers. His wall soon resembled something from a detective's office. Red string connecting photos, sticky notes marking transactions, screenshots of signatures circled in red ink. Lena called it obsession. Ethan called it survival. Meanwhile, Aaron, his attorney, worked quietly behind the scenes, coordinating with state investigators. They needed more victims, more homeowners willing to come forward. Valerie's empire had thrived on silence, and silence was always the shield of the corrupt. So Ethan began knocking on doors. At first, people hesitated. Valerie had terrorized them for years, her fake HOA letters and threats buried deep in memory. But one by one, neighbors began to speak. Some still had the fraudulent violation notices she'd sent. Others had voice messages of her demanding community dues. Each story added a new fracture to her false kingdom. Word spread quickly. Homeowners from nearby neighborhoods came forward, people who'd sold homes under pressure, who'd been fined for non-existent offenses, who'd been told their properties didn't meet HOA compliance when no HOA legally existed. Ethan documented everything. He filmed testimonials, collected letters, and built a case so detailed that even prosecutors would have to take notice. He didn't know it, but he was becoming the face of a quiet rebellion, the man who fought the HOA that never was. Robert, ever the quiet observer, joined the effort. He spent nights helping Ethan analyze bank transactions, using his old accounting skills to trace how Valerie laundered her fraud through phony inspection companies. Each line of numbers told a story, one of greed, deceit, and meticulous planning. The turning point came when they discovered a series of internal county emails, leaked by a whistleblower named Carla, a clerk in the tax department. Her message was simple. "You're right. Valerie had help from inside. I've been told to approve her appeals for years." They said it was confidential HOA business. Attached were scanned memos with the signatures of senior tax officials, approving dozens of inheritance reimbursements to Valerie's accounts. The corruption wasn't isolated. It was systemic. When Ethan read the emails, something inside him hardened. This wasn't just about one woman's obsession anymore. It was about power being sold, truth being rewritten, trust being stolen from an entire community. And he wasn't going to let it stand. That weekend, Ethan and Aaron met with two investigative journalists from a local news station. They showed everything: the emails, recordings, testimonies, the viral video of Valerie's meltdown. The reporters listened, silent and wide-eyed, recording every word. When they left, one of them promised quietly, "We'll blow this open." And they did. A week later, the story aired in a primetime exposé titled, "The HOA That Didn't Exist." The broadcast cut between Valerie's courtroom footage, interviews with victims, and footage of Ethan's evidence wall. It showed Robert's photos, Carla's leaked emails, and detailed graphics connecting county officials to Valerie's schemes. The segment ended with Ethan's quiet narration. They wanted silence. But silence only protects the guilty. The impact was instant. Phones at the county office rang off the hook. Social media exploded. The public demanded answers. State investigators, under mounting pressure, launched a formal task force. Subpoenas went out to tax offices, inspection departments, and Valerie's multiple LLCs. The web was beginning to tear. But Valerie, even cornered, didn't vanish quietly. From her house, now under surveillance, she continued to send letters, emails, even hand-delivered notes to former clients. Each one dripping with delusional righteousness. "They're trying to silence me. This is a conspiracy. You'll regret taking their side." Her signature blue ink scrawled across them all. Ethan received one too, slipped under his door one morning. No threats this time, just a single sentence. "You think you've won, but they'll turn on you next." He didn't show it to Lena. He just burned it in the kitchen sink. The investigation widened. Police uncovered bank accounts in Valerie's name connected to offshore transfers, hidden under aliases like Shaw Property Trust and Community Safety Holdings. The numbers were staggering: more than $2 million funneled through fake maintenance payments and fraudulent tax refunds. And every step of the way, Ethan provided evidence, guiding investigators like a mapmaker tracing the lines of corruption. Neighbors who once avoided him now treated him with quiet respect. The man who'd been the target of ridicule and rumors had become the reason their community was being freed. But victory came with constant tension. Anonymous cars began parking near his house at night. His security cameras caught flashes of movement, silhouettes lingering by the mailbox, someone watching from across the street. Police increased patrols, but Ethan knew what it was: Valerie's allies or remnants of the system she'd once controlled. It didn't scare him anymore. It fueled him. One afternoon, a detective named Lawson called with news that made Ethan grip his phone tighter. During a raid of Valerie's storage unit, investigators had discovered something horrifying. Boxes filled with personal data, printed copies of driver's licenses, mortgage papers, tax filings from dozens of homeowners. Every name on Maple Street. Every family she'd ever monitored. She'd been building a database of her victims, a catalog of control. The discovery solidified the case. Prosecutors now had enough to charge Valerie with fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Warrants for her accomplices were in motion, including 2 county officials and Greg. Ethan listened in silence, relief and disbelief mixing in his chest. After months of fear, the monster was finally about to fall. That night, as he looked out the window, a storm rolled over Maple Street. Rain slashed across the pavement, lightning illuminating the once quiet homes. In those flashes, he saw the ghosts of what this place had been: laughter, peace, innocence. All taken by one woman's hunger for power. But storms cleanse too. They wash away what shouldn't remain. For the first time in a long time, Ethan smiled faintly. The counterattack was complete. The truth was no longer trapped behind closed doors or court walls. It was out there, unstoppable. He didn't know that within days, Valerie's empire would collapse publicly, her name splashed across every news channel in the state. But deep down, he sensed it coming, the fall of a queen who had ruled through lies. The war for Maple Street was about to end. And for the first time since the nightmare began, justice was no longer a dream, it was a storm gathering on the horizon. The first hint that Valerie's empire was about to crumble came on a Tuesday morning, quiet, cloudless, deceptively ordinary. The kind of morning where the world feels clean and predictable. But for Maple Street, predictability was long dead. Ethan was pouring coffee when the TV flickered to life on its own, the news app autoplaying a breaking headline. A banner in red stretched across the screen. County officials arrested in HOA fraud probe, exclusive details. His hand froze midair. The reporter's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, half in disbelief, half in excitement. State investigators have confirmed that a multi-county real estate fraud operation has been uncovered, involving fake homeowner associations, falsified property tax filings, and county employees accepting bribes in exchange for approving fraudulent claims. And then he saw it, Valerie's house on the screen, surrounded by flashing lights, news vans, and police vehicles. She was standing on her lawn again, the same place where she'd once screamed that he didn't belong, now barefoot, robe flapping in the wind, mascara streaking down her face. Officers surrounded her, reading from a warrant. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, her voice shrill and incoherent as she shouted at the cameras. The woman who had built her world on control now looked like someone drowning in her own chaos. Ethan turned up the volume, transfixed. Authorities confirm that Valerie Shaw, her husband Greg, and 2 county tax officers have been charged with fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Investigators are also examining connections to similar schemes across 3 neighboring counties. It was happening live. The truth was no longer whispers and court filings. It was broadcast to the world. He stepped outside. The air felt heavy, electric, vibrating with anticipation. Maple Street was alive. Neighbors lining sidewalks, whispering, recording. News drones hovered overhead, capturing the moment that had been months in the making. The street that had once been terrorized by Valerie's paranoia now became the stage for her downfall. Police cars blocked both ends of the road. Reporters crowded near her driveway, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing like lightning. Valerie stood at the center, her once composed posture gone. Her voice cracked with rage as she screamed about conspiracies, government corruption, and fake evidence planted by outsiders. She pointed at the cameras, her eyes wild. "You don't understand. I was protecting this community. They're all thieves. All of them." Her words tumbled into incoherent screams as officers handcuffed her wrists. Greg, silent and pale, stood a few feet away, tears streaking his cheeks. His body slumped like a man who had already surrendered months ago. Ethan watched from his porch, a strange stillness in his chest. He expected satisfaction, vindication, but what he felt instead was something deeper, sadder. The sight of destruction, even deserved, carried no joy. It was the quiet tragedy of watching madness consume itself. The news coverage grew by the hour. Investigators released statements confirming what Ethan and Robert had uncovered. Valerie's network had operated for nearly a decade. Her fake HOA was one of 5 registered under different names across the state. Each entity funneled membership dues, maintenance fees, and property penalties through offshore accounts in Greg's name. It was a perfect crime until she chose the wrong target. Ethan. The journalists called it the suburban spiderweb. Each newscast peeled back another layer of deceit. Inspectors who took bribes to file false safety violations. Attorneys who notarized fake deeds for inheritance claims. County employees who processed refund checks for homes that didn't belong to Valerie at all. She had built a kingdom on paper, and paper burns fast once lit. By noon, helicopters buzzed overhead. Police raided several addresses, storage units, offices, and a consulting agency Valerie ran downtown. Inside, they found file cabinets filled with hundreds of names, property addresses, and coded payment logs. Every victim, every dollar, every lie. When the footage aired, Ethan recognized his own name near the top of a recovered document labeled Active Targets, 2025 Q1. He felt an eerie chill. She hadn't planned to stop at him. He was only one domino in a much bigger game. By evening, social media exploded again. Clips of Valerie being arrested played alongside old videos of her HOA speeches, where she'd lectured neighbors about community pride and responsibility. The contrast was surreal, the polished dictator of suburbia reduced to a ranting criminal on her own front lawn. But the most haunting footage came from inside her home. Police cameras captured walls lined with maps, red pins marking neighborhoods, color-coded files stacked in neat piles. On one shelf, dozens of binders labeled by family names. Each binder contained personal data, mortgage information, and financial notes, a complete dossier of control. She'd been studying her neighbors like specimens. Investigators even found printed photos of Ethan and Lena, circled in red ink, annotated with details about their jobs, work schedules, and bank history. Seeing that footage on the news made Ethan's blood run cold. He realized he hadn't been living next door to a nosy neighbor. He'd been living next to a predator who collected people like property. As the arrests expanded, new names surfaced: building inspectors, property assessors, and even a real estate broker. The corruption reached far deeper than anyone expected. Local officials scrambled to distance themselves, holding press conferences and promising full cooperation. But the damage was done. The public saw the truth. A middle-aged suburban woman had manipulated the very systems designed to protect homeowners, and nearly got away with it. The night after the arrests, the neighborhood was eerily still. Reporters packed up, police withdrew, and the hum of cameras faded into memory. For the first time in nearly a year, Maple Street was quiet again, truly quiet. But the silence felt different now. Not fearful, peaceful. Ethan stood in his driveway, the same spot where everything had begun, where she'd once screamed, "You can't live here." Now, the same words echoed in his mind with bitter irony. Because it turned out she was the one who didn't belong. He looked across at her empty house, dark windows, police tape fluttering in the wind. For months, that house had radiated menace. Now, it was just a hollow shell, a monument to obsession. Some part of him pitied her. The rest just felt relief. Inside, Lena lit a candle on the table and poured 2 glasses of wine. For the first time, they sat without flinching at every sound, without checking the cameras every few minutes. The nightmare was ending, one police report at a time. Later that night, Ethan received a call from Detective Lawson. They'd found more evidence in Valerie's storage unit, recordings, lists, and communications with partners in 2 other states. "This thing's bigger than we thought," Lawson said. "But you did it. You're the reason it's unraveling." Ethan hung up, emotions swelling behind his chest. It wasn't pride. It was relief that the truth had finally outrun the lies. The next morning, the newspaper headlines told the story the world already knew. Suburban fraud queen arrested, $1 million HOA scam collapses. And beneath it, a smaller headline. Local homeowner helped expose criminal network. He just wanted his peace back. Ethan folded the paper quietly and placed it on the kitchen counter. The sunlight poured through the window again, soft, golden, clean. After everything, peace didn't feel triumphant. It felt earned. But deep down, one last question lingered in his mind, one the detectives hadn't yet answered. If Valerie had built this network for nearly a decade, how many more HOAs across the state still belonged to her? The war for Maple Street was won. But the war for truth had only just begun. The storm that had hung over Maple Street for nearly a year finally broke, not with thunder but with silence. The kind of silence that follows justice, heavy, clean, and absolute. It had been 3 months since Valerie Shaw's arrest. The world had moved on, but Maple Street was still learning how to breathe again. Gone were the flashing police lights and news cameras. Gone were the crowds of reporters who once crowded driveways and porches. In their place came a slow, steady peace, fragile but real. The house that once belonged to Valerie stood vacant now, its windows boarded, its lawn overgrown. The for sale sign that had been hammered into her yard 2 weeks ago was already streaked with rain. No one wanted to buy it, not because of its condition, because of its history. The neighbors called it the house of paper, a monument to greed and paranoia. But to Ethan, it was something different. A scar. A reminder of what happens when power feeds on fear. Life was beginning to return to rhythm. Lena had gone back to work at the hospital, her laughter returning slowly like sunlight after a long winter. Robert, ever the quiet guardian of Maple Street, spent his mornings trimming hedges and waving at passing cars. The smell of fresh-cut grass had returned, the smell of normalcy. But for Ethan, the end of the nightmare wasn't about forgetting. It was about making sure it never happened again. He had spent weeks assisting the state task force as they wrapped up their investigation. Valerie's fraud ring had stretched across 4 counties and at least 2 states. By the time it ended, 12 people had been indicted: county officials, fake contractors, and brokers who had helped her launder stolen properties. The total damage, over $3.7 million. Valerie herself faced dozens of charges: fraud, identity theft, harassment, falsification of public records, conspiracy. Her husband, Greg, had accepted a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation, providing hundreds of emails and recordings that tied her to every fraudulent transaction. When the trial began, the courthouse was full again, not with neighbors this time, but with victims. People from all walks of life. Retirees, single parents, veterans, new homeowners, all of them connected by the same story. A smiling woman who had turned their trust into a weapon. Ethan sat in the back row, hands clasped, watching as Valerie entered the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, wrists shackled. Her once flawless hair was dull, her eyes hollow. The Queen of Maple Street was gone. What remained was a ghost of her former self, fragile, angry, and still utterly convinced she was right. During the trial, prosecutors laid out the full scope of her crimes. The evidence was overwhelming: spreadsheets, voice recordings, testimony from county insiders. Valerie listened with a faint, disbelieving smile, as if the entire courtroom were a stage play she refused to accept was real. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, she didn't flinch. She simply turned toward Ethan, her gaze steady, her lips moving silently. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He knew what they were. I was right. Her delusion would outlive her freedom. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in state prison, followed by restitution to her victims. Greg received 2 years probation and mandatory therapy. The corrupt county officials faced terms of their own, their careers destroyed, their reputations erased. The web had finally unraveled, every thread exposed to the light. As the gavel struck, the room exhaled. For Ethan, it wasn't triumph. It was release. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed again, their cameras hungry for one final statement. But Ethan gave them none. He wasn't interested in fame. He'd had enough of being a headline. He just wanted to go home, to sit beside his wife in the house that had nearly been stolen and know that, finally, it was truly theirs. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the oak tree, he stood on the porch with a quiet glass of whiskey in hand. The light hit the wood just right, golden, peaceful. The same spot where it had all begun. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the rage, the sleepless nights. He thought about Robert, about Aaron, about the countless strangers who had been brave enough to come forward. And he realized something simple but powerful. Truth, once spoken, doesn't die. It echoes. Robert joined him on the porch a few minutes later, carrying 2 folding chairs. They sat in silence, watching the street glow under the sunset. The sound of children laughing returned from the cul-de-sac, the same sound that had vanished for almost a year. For the first time, Ethan didn't tense at every noise. He smiled. It was over. Weeks passed. The neighborhood rebuilt. The mailbox was repainted. The tree where Valerie's camera had once been hidden now bore a small metal plaque. Not a memorial, but a reminder. It read, "Truth always has witnesses." One evening, as Ethan was heading in for dinner, a letter arrived, official envelope, state seal. Inside was a simple thank you note from the Attorney General's office, acknowledging his help in exposing one of the largest real estate fraud rings in state history. Attached was a copy of the restitution check, compensation for damages, harassment, and emotional distress. It wasn't the money that mattered. It was the closure. Lena framed the letter and hung it in the hallway, right beside their wedding photo. 2 symbols of survival, love, and truth, side by side. Months later, Ethan would still get messages from other homeowners across the country, people who'd seen his story online, thanking him for speaking out. Some were fighting their own HOA Karens, others battling corrupt associations or fabricated liens. His story had become more than a scandal. It had become a warning and an inspiration. One message stood out. You didn't just expose a criminal. You reminded people that we don't have to be afraid of those who pretend to hold power over us. That, more than anything, was the redemption. As autumn rolled in, the air grew cooler, the sky sharper. The leaves on the oak tree turned from green to gold. The house finally felt like a home again, safe, warm, earned. Ethan often found himself standing at the window in the evening, watching the soft streetlights flicker and fade. Not in fear this time, but in gratitude. Because Maple Street had taught him something he'd never forget. Evil doesn't always come with a weapon. Sometimes it wears a smile, carries a clipboard, and calls itself helpful. But truth, once unleashed, can bring even the strongest illusion crashing down. On the night before winter, he and Lena walked hand in hand to the edge of the street. The air smelled of rain and cold earth. The neighborhood shimmered under holiday lights again, laughter spilling from doorways, the sound of music drifting from open windows. It was beautiful. It was ordinary. And after everything they had survived, ordinary felt like a miracle. As they turned back toward their home, the porch light clicked on automatically, bathing them in soft golden glow. Ethan glanced once at the oak tree, the old watcher, the silent witness. Then he smiled, exhaling the last weight of the past. The nightmare had ended. The peace was real. And justice, though slow, though painful, had finally come home.